Women in Tech tonight was one of the first events of this year's a2Tech360 lineup to sell out, which is really heartening, and I'm so glad that you guys made it out tonight. If you don't already know, a2Tech360 is Spark's celebration of innovation in arts in Ann Arbor, comprised of 26 events over a week-long period all throughout the city. We wouldn't be able to do any of this, of course, without the support of our sponsors, Comcast Business, which launched Comcast Rise, a multi-year commitment providing grants, marketing, media, and creative mentorship to small businesses owned by people of color and women, Bell Impact Fund, an early-stage venture capital fund, which invests in women-led startups in Michigan, and MEDC, the supporting a2Tech360 sponsor. Tomorrow, we'll be back here at Cirque for Emerging Leaders, and then on Friday is Tech Talk at Michigan Theater from 10 to 12:30, where you'll hear from 12 brilliant minds behind the Ann Arbor region's innovative companies. After Tech Talk wraps up, we hope you'll come out and explore Tech Trek and Mobility Row from 1 to 5. This street fair style exhibition of mobility and innovation, more than 60 companies will be on display on Liberty between Division and 5th. There will be robots roaming around with swag and treats, demonstrations of emerging technologies, support at the Talent Terrace for all the job seekers out there, and so much more. There's still time to register, so go to a2tech360.com to learn more. Hopefully, everyone has had an opportunity to cross off some of the networking bingo squares. I'm told some are harder to fill out than others. I think we're looking for somebody from Purdue University to try and fill a square, and a couple of others that are a little bit trickier. There will be a short break after the presentations and before the fireside chat to get those last squares crossed off. And then Spark staffers will come around to collect the bingo cards, or you can bring them up to the registration area. After our panel discussion, we'll do the drawing, and someone here will win a $100 gift card to use at any Zingerman's business. Also, if you're a job seeker, look for the green dots on the name tags. That's code for I'm hiring. So let's get to why we're all here. We have 3 amazing presenters tonight, each with unique perspectives and insights into leadership, culture, and how to define success. First up, please welcome Ayishwariya Menon, Managing Director of DEO.com.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Ayishwariya Menon, and it's DEO.care. So my journey started very far away from here in sunny tropical Malaysia, where I grew up. And somehow I've managed to end up in one of the coldest places I could have chosen. So today I'll talk a little bit about that journey and really how my career has brought me here. I first left KL to move to London, where I went to college to study biomedical engineering. As a fresh-faced 18-year-old with somewhat questionable winter fashion choices, I chose biomedical engineering because it sounded interesting. I'd always had this natural curiosity for learning. I loved learning about how the human body worked, but I also really liked maths and physics, and I thought this course just sounded like a great combination of all of these things. When I graduated, I worked for a startup from my university that was developing an orthopedic surgical robot. The technology has since been acquired by Stryker. But I spent a couple of years here, and I did a little bit of everything and was out of my depth all the time. But I learned to research information, wade through the noise, and pick out what I needed quickly and apply it. A very valuable lesson early in my career. At the same time, I learned to communicate well with surgeons, translating both clinical and technical concepts, another skill that's served me well over the years. I found that I really liked that dynamic environment and being at the cutting edge of innovation, really working on new and novel, exciting things. So that took me to the next step in my journey, a slightly shorter one across the channel, to work for a Belgian company that was tapping into an exciting new space, the world of 3D printing in medicine. Here, Materialize, the company that I was working for, was already a leader in 3D printing, and they were active in various industries, manufacturing, aerospace, design. They were starting to get into medical applications. So it was a very exciting time to be there because we were starting to look at new, novel things, and Materialize was a pioneer in this way. I spent a couple of years here developing medical devices, really changing the way some orthopedic surgery was done. I then moved to their offices in KL, back home, but was completely out of my comfort zone work-wise because I was tasked with business development for our orthopedic solutions in the Asia-Pacific region. I found myself learning new skills and maturing quickly as I both built the business and grew a team to support that business. In the early days, I was a one-woman show. I'd jump on a plane to Australia, drive to a surgery after the overnight trip, go and run a workshop with a partner and head back home. But over the course of 4 years that I did this role, we grew into a multidisciplinary team of about 8. I didn't really plan to move again, but I did, to Materialize's office in Plymouth, Michigan, where I was to lead a program for a novel pediatric device that was in collaboration with a wonderful team at the University of Michigan. I took the role because the work just sounded so interesting. We were able to work on a truly life-saving device and bring it from a lab environment to production through FDA clearance. And I was also ready for a technical challenge again. And boy, did I get what I asked for. We were again pushing the boundaries of the space and what had been done before, and really having to build the basic elements and structures for this device development program from scratch. So I did that for about 4 years, and then felt it was time for a change. Although over the course of the years, I had a lot of change with literal moves. I had been working for Materialize for 11 years at this point, so there was some stability that came with that. At this stage, I felt it was time to move on. And when I started to think about what I wanted to do, I felt I needed more freedom in choosing how I spent my day. So I started to think about consulting, but it felt a little bit crazy because it was March 2020 and the world was becoming very uncertain. And it was also honestly very hard to leave a company that I'd been with for so long. I'd felt some kind of loyalty to, I'd built up good relationships, I was on a good track. But once I decided it was time to move on, it felt like a load off my mind. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still had a very vague idea of what I was going to do next, and I was terrified. Some days it felt like a breakup, really. Some days I think, best decision ever. And then other days I'm going, oh my God, what have I done? But change was in the air, and circumstances seemed to be pushing me in that direction too. I'd settled down at this point, gotten married, had a family. I couldn't just up and leave again. I was actually on a work visa at this point that was tied to my job. But the week I decided I wanted to move on, my permanent residence permit came through literally a week before immigration shut down because of the pandemic. So I thought, okay, it's a sign, I'm doing it. And I started my own consulting business. I reached out to my network, and within a couple of months, I was fully occupied and loving it, frankly. I was so glad I made this leap that seemed so scary only a few months ago. I loved the flexibility of choosing when and how I worked, and to work on projects that were really interesting to me. One of my bigger clients as a consultant was DEO.care. They're a Belgian scale-up whose founder also happened to be the former head of Materialize's medical division, the person who hired me there, essentially, and over the years had become a friend and a mentor to me. So they had developed this exciting new health tech platform to look at making operating rooms more efficient, and I consulted with them for about over a year, at which point I was offered the opportunity to lead their USA business and operations. So I thought, okay, exciting, big, hard, probably yes, and scary, but then, what isn't, right, at the beginning? So here I am today, managing director of DEO USA, and very excited to see what's in store for me in my startup journey. I will add that it's been really great working with someone who I trust so completely and consider a mentor as well. That's just made this whole process so much easier. So if there's one constant in my story, it's change, and I think probably many of us can relate to that. Whether it's change that I've sought for myself or change that's been thrust upon me, I found that when I've embraced situations and kind of gone with the flow, things have sort of fallen into place. So I thought to wrap up for myself today, I'd just share a couple of things that have helped me in the hope that it might resonate with you too. So I've always been a great student. I was good at exams, and I got a lot of validation from high scores, right? But when you're in an innovative field, failure is inevitable. There's always going to be a lot of it, actually, a lot of ups and downs. And coming to terms with that was hard initially, to fail as someone who was always getting straight A's, right? But I find that I've always put more value in growth and learning over ticking that success box. And viewing things from that lens has really helped me keep my focus on what motivates me rather than what the world views as success. And every time those lessons are hard and that change is hard, knowing that, hey, if I can handle this today, the next thing that comes my way, no big deal, right? That's really gone a long way. And secondly, finding anchors everywhere I've been has been a really grounding and stabilizing element for me as well as I've handled this change. When I look at my journey at different places I've lived, different companies I've worked with, different roles I've played, I find myself going back to these same anchors over and over again. And knowing what these are, being aware of them, and making time for them, that's been so helpful in this journey for me. These can be cultural, social, spiritual, whatever it is. And I feel like that's been such an important part of this journey as well. So one anchor in my journey has been the camaraderie of women, actually. Everywhere I've gone, I have found a few good women, and we have formed some solid friendships and supported each other throughout these different phases of our life. These are a few friends of mine from college. We're all engineers, and we all happen to be dancers as well. And we're from completely different backgrounds. Louisa's from England, Kathy's from Trinidad and Tobago, Hilda's from Iceland, and you just heard all about me. But over the years, even though we've come from different places and we've lived in different places for most of it, we've shared in each other's journeys and these ups and downs of work, relationships, marriage, babies, loss, grief, whatever it is, right? And everywhere I've gone, I have found similar amazing women to help support each other throughout this journey as well. There is just something about this sisterhood of shared experience that is both uplifting and grounding. And so I guess I'll end my session today by thanking you for showing up here and being a part of that sisterhood too. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, next, please welcome Thressa Nichols, Director of People, Talent, and Culture at Genomenon.
Hey, how's it going? So when I was initially asked to do this talk, I always think about, my field and where I am is really specific to me, and how do I relate kind of what I've learned over the years back and make it valuable to a bunch of people going after a bunch of different things. And so I think about where I am now and the advice I would have given myself, and it's really hard because I didn't know this existed. I grew up in a really small town. We had goats and chickens. No one was talking to me about venture capital. No one was talking to me about equity. My parents never mentioned people operations. And so I started thinking about, okay, well, shit, how did I get here? What did I do to move in this path and make me open to these opportunities? And I reflected over the past few days, and I've come up with my list of 5 things. And so for this whole talk, I'm going to talk about my 5 things. And I think they're applicable to everyone. I think if you, embrace them, you can find your own path. It won't be mine, but it'll be yours. So starting with your MVP. So in the startup world, which is where I come from, that's your basic, most embarrassing product. But it's a thing, and it's a thing you can start showing people to prove that maybe you deserve to exist, and it can do a few things. And so this is my human MVP. She's pretty outgoing. She likes people. She likes this chicken in this photo. We're not sure if anyone's going to pay her money. And we're not sure how productive she is, but she's the start of something. And so I think if you take a moment to reflect, you all have your MVP, things that, you came from, you started with, that kind of have always been core to who you are. And so that kind of leads me into knowing your values. So when I join a lot of startups, they're right in the Series B range, and that's when they start to get serious about their core values. The leadership team meets together and they're like, what do we care about? What's going to drive our decision making? You should know those for yourselves too. If businesses can have them, you can totally have them. And I think, again, having those, I always felt really strongly about standing up for the underdog. I always had this really strong compass of what was right in the world and what I thought was possible. And so I didn't know people ops existed. I didn't know about parental leave policies at 14. But I feel like leaning into that part of myself slowly guided me in that direction. And I genuinely encourage all of you, if you don't know yours, just like how companies put them on their website, think about yours. What are they? How can you reflect back at them when you're at a crossroads of 2 job opportunities or 2 decisions in your life? Because I think if they sit well with you, you'll be kind of straying in the right direction, even if you don't know what that direction is. Third thing on my list of getting to somewhere that you don't know exists is seeking out your board. So in the field that I'm in and with the network I have, I get a lot of questions about how do I find a mentor? What should I be looking for in my mentor? Where can I find that person? And I think this is one of those areas where we could take a few notes from the business world of don't try to get everything from one person. Find a board, find a group of people. My parenting mentor is so much different than my interview prep mentor. And I think having a group of people that you can pull on gives you an opportunity to not have all your eggs in one basket. You're not out there seeking some kind of crazy unicorn person that doesn't exist, because you're going after your own individual buckets of things, and those are individual to you. And so it's going to be really hard to find the exact same person who's going after the exact same buckets in the world. So self-reflect. What are the things you need compliments on? And when I, not just like you look pretty today, but like people to bring you different perspectives on things to make you fuller, wholer, more educated when you're navigating the paths. Fourth, weathering the roadblocks. So at every startup I've ever worked at, every CEO I've ever worked with has had some earth-shattering failure along the way. Usually by the time I'm involved, it's like their 4th startup and there's like 2 they don't want to talk about. And like somehow it comes out of the woodworks and they're like, well, that was like a different time in my life. I'm like, okay, sure. So I think if you navigate 1 through 3 and you have these people like I have had in my life who aren't just with you when you're rocket shipping up your career and you're really fun to be around, but also like me shortly after COVID with, I just lost my job. My husband was diagnosed with cancer. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next in my life. I was so mean and so grumpy, and I was unemployed. And you want a board just like a business wants a board that will be around you during those times too. And who knows what your core values are, and who knows what your MVP was and where you were kind of starting to build towards and can get you back on path. And then finally, never staying stagnant. I think if you have these things in place, staying in motion is very easy. I am the weirdo at a party on Saturday night that will talk parental leave and vacation policies, at the bar with a drink in my hand, and people are like, okay, just calm down. But I love that stuff, and I love it because it came from my values and it came from who I was. And I've seen the tough parts and came out on the other end. And so it hasn't been hard for me to go educate myself and stay relevant and continue to network with people in this space because I like it. So you're not gonna like my thing, but what is your thing? What pulls on your MVP? What pulls on your values that doesn't feel like work when you're learning about it and staying relevant and just becomes natural to you? That's all I got.
All right, some amazing advice for all of us. For our final presentation tonight, please welcome Jen Baird, a serial entrepreneur and CEO.
Do I have to do anything? Hi, everybody. Jen Baird, and I am excited to, anchor this thing. And my goal is to introduce you to some of the interesting permutations I've gone through. And some people, I just saw one in the audience, have been on this journey with me. So I started before college, and I thought, I was one of those crazy high school students who actually thought I wanted to be a CEO someday. Like, who does that? Very weird. But it actually is who I am, and that's what you guys were talking about, right? Leadership is core, and I loved the big picture. And I went to University of Michigan, University of Michigan as a BA in organizational psych, and then I went to Northwestern and got a master's degree in corporate strategy and finance. And I'm now going to tell you in a few minutes about all the technical startups that I've led, but you'll notice that I don't have a technical background at all. And I have had lots of conversations at various points when people are like, are you a patent attorney? No. Are you a doctor? No. Are you an engineer? Nope. I can't tell you all the things I've been offered as possibly being. But these are things that I am that are not necessarily work related, but they are part of what makes me so. We started out by saying I'm a serial entrepreneur. This is the 5th startup. I'm currently involved with the 5th startup in my life. My COVID project was starting a blog to try and talk about all the things I've learned as a startup CEO. So I put the blog site up there. It is available and wished on anybody that cares about or wants to learn about the stuff that I've learned. I used to share these things over coffee. In COVID, couldn't share them over coffee, so I shared them on a blog, and I continue to try and do that every week. I'm on the advisory council of Michigan Founders Fund, which is all about founders, supporting founders, and trying to build great companies. So check that out if you aren't familiar with it. I'm on the board of directors of Hope Clinic, which provides free medical, dental, health, food care for people who are uninsured, generally. And so that's a really exciting Christian ministry that has been, I'm at least a decade in on that. I have a high school sweetheart that I've been married to I've been a couple with for 38 years. We have 2 adult daughters, one of whom is a 4th year med student trying to find her way to residency. If there could be more stress in life, I'm not sure what that would be. And my other daughter is, we have great dinner table conversations. She's into forensic science. So we have the doctor who wants to talk about the living, breathing heart, and the forensic science who wants to talk about blood spatter and DNA analysis and skulls. So, we have great dinner conversations. I also have a horse, and I ride dressage for fun. There you go. And I'm also a committed Christian, and that is what I lean into when things get hard. So I'm going to just dive back into, one other thing that I forgot to put on here. On May 10th this year, I actually had neurosurgery. So I found out in March that I had a couple of tumors on my brain by accident. And in May, they took them out, and my whole startup had to cope with that whole process. So I'm standing here today feeling pretty good, but it is definitely a journey that I'm still recovering from. And it's certainly inconvenient for a startup when the CEO has to go off and have neurosurgery. So a little bit about my background, and I picked this picture because it's a winding road, right? Lots of different things, and I thought I would just try and capture what some of the stages were. So right after college, I went and got my MBA at the same time I was working for First National Bank of Chicago. And I got all the way buried down into cash management sales. Now, you may not know this, but cash management is one tiny little piece of the treasury function of large companies. And I became an expert at that. And then I was like, what in the world am I doing? I'm the person who likes to think about the whole company, and now I'm thinking about the sliver of cash management, wire transfers, ACH, and SWIFT payments. And how many people care about that? So I got out of that. And what I did is I went to a boutique consulting firm, and I spent 8 years there doing operations improvement consulting. People, process, technology, 25 different companies, 35 different projects over 8 years. Learned a ton about how to build companies across a lot of different things. That has given me an enormous reservoir of patterns to match and things to learn about. I agree with my fellow speakers who are talking about learn. Yeah, it's the only way to be. Then I joined a company called Integrated Sensing Systems. This was my jump out of consulting into the startup world, which is a very hard jump to make. And honestly, I learned a lot of things not to do about startups, because this is an organization that's very grant funded, and I learned a ton of things. I was only there for 15 months before I went off and co-founded my first startup, Synetics Ultrasound. Now, Synetics to this day does not have a website. Synetics is it has been a great learning experience. I had great people that I worked with on it, but I learned a lot about how long cycles of things can be very hard to fund and to build. And so that's a great experience. I actually, during COVID, stepped away from that company finally, because I didn't want to fundraise for it anymore. It's actually, my co-founder still is doing whatever he's doing with it. But it was the first experience kind of dipping my toe in the water and working on a MEMS product. So MEMS is micro electromechanical systems. And this was trying to build a planar array to do 3D ultrasound. And I can't say that we ever quite mastered the thing, but you'll learn. At that point, after my husband and I were pretty much totally running out of money, my husband's a high school teacher. So I've always been the cash deliverer of the family, and this transition into Synetics was my first experience where I went a year. Do you know those statements that you get where they tell you how much you've paid into Social Security, and they have a dollar number, and they tell you over the years? I have a 0 in that year. I literally did not make a single dollar for that entire year, and I think that was my proving that I had the grit to actually be a startup person. I did go to, with the same co-founder, University of Michigan. We found some technology, went through a series of things that ultimately turned into Accuray cytometers. And Accuray was my most successful startup to date. We took about 3 years to build a product, raised something like $35 million, venture-backed, and ultimately, let's see, when we launched, in the first 18 months, we got on all 7 continents, including Antarctica. And we ultimately had a European subsidiary, sold the company for $205 million to Becton Dickinson. It was quite a journey. So we went from 2 people at a kitchen table to 85 some people. And I just, a couple of years ago, this was 10 years later, got an email from somebody who said, thank you for founding Accuray. I'm still selling your product, and it is still making a difference in the world. And it's got to be one of the best emails one ever gets. Wow. And I don't know how they found me. I was a LinkedIn reach out from a total stranger. I'm okay, that was pretty crazy. Then I went and left Accuray and joined Dawn White's startup, which was Accio Energy. And we worked on turbine-free wind energy for 8 years. And that was another exercise. I have perhaps a tendency to go for things that are really ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. Accio probably was in that category. Accio was ultimately focused on offshore wind. And for a while, we believed we had about a 50% cost advantage. And this is for utility scale power generation, wind power generation. The European community got their act together, figured out how to cut about 50% out of the cost of an offshore wind farm. And at that point, I couldn't raise the match, and the next step was going to actually put people's lives at risk, the pilot that we were going to do. And it wasn't clear that the goal that we were going to try and achieve, even if we got it 100% right, and somebody tell me out there, how many times you get things 100% right the first time you do them, right? Like never. We're going to put lives at risk, and it isn't going to matter if we get it 100% right. So I had to convince the board, my team, and the U.S. government that we weren't going to do this anymore. We gave $2.5 million back to the U.S. government. Do you know that the U.S. government really doesn't like to take money back? We give money back to our investors, and we shut down the company. That was a hard decision. But from there, I started looking at opportunities in the University of Michigan in healthcare, found about a dozen things, but landed on something that is now called AHI, Analytic for Hemodynamic Instability. And we formed a company called Fifth Eye, and I brought 3 people out of the University of Michigan. This was in 2018 is when we actually started operations. We got through a lot of FDA journeys, high trust journeys, ISO journeys, and we got FDA clearance for this software as a medical device. We started piloting in Denver, Flint, and Ann Arbor this year, and we're just about to convert to our first customers and hospitals. And that's what I've been working on all week. And I'm not sure which one is going to sign the sales order first. We got a little bit of a race in 2 different locations, and that's been going on, and that's a really exciting time. So those are, just kind of my steps. And I don't think this road is over yet. Like, I'm a little crazy. I might do this again. And you'll notice that I had one in energy, one in ultrasound, which is kind of hardware medical devices. Accuray was a life science research tool. Fifth Eye is software as a medical device. You'll notice that I was never the inventor of the technology. I kind of come alongside the inventors, and we figure out how to make a company out of it. So, and when I started Fifth Eye, which is a cloud-first company, I actually didn't know what the cloud was. When I started Accuray, I didn't know what a flow cytometer was. When I started AccuEnergy, I knew nothing about the energy business. You notice the theme. I'm very willing to jump in the deep into the pool and figure it out as I go, and try and make decisions and get people motivated around these things. So I'm really excited that we're going to get a chance to have a Q&A session in a little bit. But that's a little bit about my story, and I hope I've triggered some things that you guys can ask questions about.
All right, it's my honor now to introduce Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, moderator of our fireside chat. Congresswoman Dingell represents Michigan's 12th district in the U.S. House of Representatives, where she has made it a priority to be a voice for the Midwest on issues that matter most to working families. A member of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, Debbie is a leader on efforts to grow manufacturing, improved access to affordable health care, support seniors and veterans, and protect the Great Lakes. Recognized as one of the 25 hardest working members of Congress, Debbie is focused on forging bipartisan solutions that support Michigan's families and economy, including improving long-term care and ushering in the future of the auto industry. Before being elected to Congress, Debbie worked in the auto industry for more than 3 decades, where she was president of General Motors Foundation and a senior executive responsible for public affairs. Let's welcome Debbie and our panelists back to the stage for our fireside chat.
They told me I could bring my wine on stage, but there's no way that I can bend all the way, so I feel like I was really deceived.
I think drinking's a good thing at this hour. Although I don't drink because it's fattening. Well, is everybody having fun? A good way to spend a Wednesday with other women? Yep. So my job's easy. I just have to ask questions or get this discussion going. You've heard from all of our panelists. They did a great job. Let's give them one more round of applause for telling their stories. So, first of all, I always love being with women. Not that I don't love the men, but women need, I'm going to give you my one bugaboo in life. Women need to support each other. And when there may be a couple of you that are more of my generation, but I'm not old, but I'm seasoned. And when this is a true story. When I interviewed for my job at General Motors, I was actually asked, why would a woman want to work at General Motors? I mean, that's a true story. And Mary Barr was one of my colleagues, and now she's CEO. So, we've come a long way. But in my generation, women didn't, the Old Boys Network, which is still alive and well, but it was even more alive and well then. And, the men all did their deals on golf courses. We weren't allowed on golf courses on Saturday. I mean, I could go through the whole version. And women felt threatened. If one succeeded, they might not. Well, let me tell you, the old boys have known for a long time that when you support each other, you all succeed. And women need to know that when you support each other, women succeed. So my one message of tonight is women need to. So I want to ask the three of you, it's great to see you. Did you have a mentor who helped you along in your career? And how did you find your mentor, or did the mentor find you? So how did you begin to have that kind of where you're trying to go? Just go down though.
Sure. Yeah, I think I've been pretty lucky in the sense that mentors have kind of turned up at the right times and the right places. So I haven't had to go looking for them necessarily. But I would say that, that relationship, for me, it's always been kind of fluid and organic. So it's less structured. I guess if you're looking to find someone, I would think aside from looking for someone you want to grow into from a work perspective, I also think about what values I want to emulate and whether our personalities suit each other. I mean, sometimes, I get advice like, you have to be demanding and ask. Women don't ask enough. But that's just not how I roll, right? And so I like working with people who understand my perspective as well, and I can relate to their style, and we work well together. So that's been a really nice approach in my life, I guess.
Yeah. So I have had many mentors. I would say my most common mentors have been previous bosses who at the time that they were my boss, I was annoyed with them. And then later, after I had a new boss, I wouldn't stop harassing them about questions I had, and they just kept responding. So I was like, well, you're my mentor now. And so I think them knowing me and having that relationship of what it was like to have me reporting to them, I'm still somewhat early in my career. And so that's the type of mentorship I needed, is like, why did I hit the roadblocks I had with you? And no one can know that like you, the person who had to deal with annoying me reporting to them. And so it's been a really nice relationship that I've had. I've also had a great male mentor. We're like, we love the men, and it's like,
Yeah, I wouldn't be where I am without men mentors. So I want to make that clear.
So I have two people that really stick out in my mind. One is Elizabeth Berry. I'm going to give her a shout out. She's absolutely incredible and supportive. She's amazing. And the second is Andy Jensen. I worked for him, and in like my second meeting that I was in with him, and I'm in people operations, he was like, let me take the notes. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. Is that slang? And he's like, no, somebody's going to ask you to take notes, and I'm going to stand up and say, no, I'll do it. And so that like set the tone for the relationship. And then I was like, oh, hell yeah, Andy, I'll follow you. And so he kind of became my mentor because he exhibited these things in him that I was like, yes. And he advocated for me, and I've just continued to bug him.
I have to add, all of my mentors have been men too, and they've been wonderful.
Yeah, there you go.
I was thinking about this question because I'm like, okay, I kind of divide my career into two phases. First phase, when I actually had bosses. And then the second phase, I mean, I haven't had a boss in 20 years. And so it's really a little different to find mentors when you, and so the first phase, I would agree with everything you guys just said, but I'm not going to repeat it. And the second phase, now I'm a CEO, so who are my mentors? Other CEOs. So you have to build those relationships with people. And by the way, it goes bilaterally, right? I've had CEOs that I met with every 6 months, and we held each other accountable. Why do you tolerate that, Scott? Why do you tolerate that, Jen? We learn from these things. So that's been a really interesting dynamic. The other interesting dynamic for me is and I appreciate the CEOs because they understand my point of view in those struggles. I've had a few tremendous mentors that were on my board of directors or got involved and were investors. And Tom Kinnear, who I'm sure many of you know, has been a wonderful mentor for decades. And I think I met him because he was friends with my mother. And that's how we met. But he's taught me so many different things. Walt Young's another some person that I consider a mentor. But I also have found that some of my mentors are people that report to me. And that's kind of an interesting dynamic. But I am always trying to hire people who are smarter than me in various areas. And I have a tremendous amount to learn. And so the person probably right now, Brandon Veroloni, who works with me today, we mentor each other because our skills are super complementary. He's a tremendous technologist. I am a beginner learning technologist, and he's very interested in all the business sides of things, and we have taught each other a tremendous amount. And so I think mentorship can be very fluid, and it just takes a learning posture and learning from everybody.
So let me ask you one more question then. Is it important to be open to people and to get input? And should you be afraid of making a mistake?
Today I was on a call with a group that I met with on Monday. So we've got a fast track proposal that's rocketing through. And on Monday, met with this group, never met with half of them before. And they said, how much is this widget? And I said, $350. Today we were on another call and they said, how much was that widget? I said, $500. And they said, didn't you say $350 on Monday? And I said, I did. And I was wrong. It's $500. And my team was like, how do you get away with that? And I said, what? I was wrong. I said I was wrong, and everybody accepts it much better when you say you're wrong. It's much worse if you try and come up with some explanation rather than just like own very clearly that you're wrong. And I find that actually owning that mistake, whatever it is, that's a tiny example, but it's an example that happened today. So owning that mistake is a way of getting feedback and learning and getting people to trust you. We were talking during the break about trustworthiness and trust. And if you can admit to a mistake, you go way up in people's confidence in trusting you, right? And trust there's a lot of trust that goes on in mentoring relationships.
Either of you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things, I kind of mentioned before that I look for both of my mentors that have ended up being previous bosses of mine. And it's because after I'm like, oh, I'm a little annoying, aren't I? I'm a little boisterous, aren't I? And so really being open to that unfiltered advice where like these people don't have the ability to fire me anymore. They're just going to tell me like, you did that to me too, Thressa. It was the worst. That's why they're responding like that. Is very helpful for me because at the end of the day, if you're really trying to excel, if you're really trying to get your point across, it doesn't matter how right you are if no one can hear you because you're so in their face or because the way you're saying it doesn't translate to the way they process information. And so having people willing to like actually give me constructive criticism, because what I'm really trying to do is get the job done. And if the way I'm doing it isn't getting the job done, then I'm also unhappy, right?
I second that really. I think what I look for when I'm in a mentoring relationship with someone is to fix things, to get better. I want to know what I'm doing wrong so I can get better at that, right? And I think it's also very rewarding as a mentor to be able to work with someone who listens to what you're saying, takes that feedback and immediately you see that they're growing with that, they're getting better, and they're achieving success in whatever it was they set out. So that's a really nice part of that as well.
Okay, so let's switch subjects. But it's all about technology. How do you help bridge the generational differences with the use of technology for professional success? And how do you keep up with how it changes? Sometimes it seems like every day.
I have a response to this.
Good.
So I lead people operations at my company, and a lot of what we do is onboarding, right? And so you're onboarding senior developers, and you're onboarding new salespeople, and you're sometimes onboarding VP level folks. And so my go-to is repetition, saying it lots of times, multiple mediums, because people learn in a lot of different ways, bringing in the experts, and a sense of humor, because I just stumbled through using PowerPoint the other day because I'm strictly a Google Slides girl these days. And so
And I'm a PowerPoint girl.
There you go. And so
Generational.
remembering that it's this is still just a slide deck. It's fine. We're all going to be okay. I default to the sense of humor side.
I think thinking about the generational differences, it's interesting how you have cultural reference points. And Debbie and I probably have more cultural reference points than I have with some of the...
We're a little more seasoned, but we've got a lot more ahead of us.
I got a lot more ahead of me, but 55, getting up there.
Yeah.
And it's hard to... There seem to be differences in work ethic, culture, what the expectation. I grew up in the 80s. It was really driving. That's still normal. The kind of value system that some of the more recent generations are going through is a little bit harder for me to relate to, because I'm I don't quite understand that, because that's not normal for me. So I think, but you have to just keep listening and trying to figure out where they're coming from and what's important and where you can find value. The one thing that I find in tech world, and I'm using tech broadly, especially in startups, is you're often trying to recruit really dynamite, smart problem solvers, technologists. And I haven't found this to fail across all generations. Smart technologists, problem solvers, it's like red meat. Throw the juicy problem on the floor and they all swarm it. And that seems to work no matter what generation you're going through. And it's more like the rest of life and what the expectations are there that affects it. But startup people love to solve problems, and they like being in the gray, and they're not intimidated by things they don't know. And that does seem to hold true across the board.
I'm not sure I have much more to add, actually.
Okay, then.
Covered everything.
So let me ask you this. How do you see future tech designs impacted by STEM, and more importantly, getting more women to go into technology, and how does that change? How can that improve, that's my word, future technology designs?
Well, coming from the medical device background, I think it's been great to have women at the table at the start of development, right? Looking at ideas, looking at design, looking at processes, because we're moving away a lot with medical devices from a one-size-fits-all approach, and it's becoming a lot more personalized. It's becoming very population-based. So if you don't have women at the table, you're going to design something that doesn't work for half the population, which doesn't make sense, of course. And then at the same time, there's also a lot more interest in solving problems that are very, that really only relate to the female population, like reproductive health, for example, and how we can solve more issues that we face there. I mean, just thinking about, I don't know about the rest of you, but I hate speculums, and I have been.
Okay, this is a good conversation.
I recently looked this up, right? I actually recently looked up why there haven't been better designs, because I feel there are enough women already in the field that someone's got to have come up with something better. And I did find a couple of boutique companies that have apparently developed more user-friendly devices, but it seems funding is the issue. So I think that's a very interesting next phase in like the STEM field, right? We're gonna need to see more women in leadership roles that make those decisions to fund those kinds of projects, that can invest in those kinds of projects as well. So I think it's great that we're getting more women in the discussion.
I like that wormhole. Let's go deeper. I have very little to add to that other than, I say this to my senior leaders all the time, like, please speak second, please speak last, because when you speak first, then we don't hear all of the ideas and all of the solutions in the room. And if you, as the CEO or as the leader, is telling me that you want the best solution, the only way to get that is to hear all of the possibilities, not just yours, because believe it or not, yours might not be the best. And so I feel like we have been missing 50% of the solutions, 50% of the products, 50% of the things, the innovations for so long. And it's just really exciting to start seeing us close that gap, because there's 50% of the best ideas we haven't been hearing for so long, 50% of the coolest things that haven't had a voice yet. And so there's so many possibilities as this next generation starts getting more and more into the workforce and there is more funding for these types of programs and things like that. I'm like, oh my God, there's about to be so many cool things out there. I can't wait.
I'm just going to add one thing. I have a husband and a son-in-law who are both math teachers. So, and I'm not technically a STEM product, although I work in tech. And I'm just thinking about what I see in the middle school, high school, because around the dinner table discussion. And the thing that these math teachers comment on is so many people, especially women, say, I hate math. Don't say that, ever. You know, we all do hard things, and it's culturally acceptable to say that. And it's really not helpful to the people and kids, just in general, boys and girls. But it's really not good to say that. And the other thing that I think is really hard, and I go speak to the engineering school at Michigan a lot, and, you know, the gender differences, I mean, the number of times I've been in rooms where, 10% by women is a lot. And I get to be the token female a lot in those kinds of situations. And I think all of us should take every opportunity we have to be the token female, or hopefully, dominate the thing, because we need to be seen, because there's people that need to see that it's possible. And that is, a role model problem. But I do feel like, and I say the token female, but the number of panels, this is cool. We got 4 women up here. That's awesome. The number of times that I'm on a panel and I am the only woman is like 99%. I end up in that space a lot. And I've run into all kinds of sexism along the way. And I was thinking of one of my mentors, who was kind of like your mentor. He was 20 years my senior. When I brought his resume to the board, they said, why are you hiring your replacement? I said, I'm not. And they said, well, he's been a CEO. I said, but he doesn't want to be a CEO. And he came to work for me, but he was a great mentor because he had 20 years of experience, and he was a CEO. And he did the same kind of thing where he was like, these are things you need to do to not, to be your role. And then we would go to things and people would look at him, and he was the gray-haired man. And so guess what? We would go talk to suppliers, and they would talk to him all the time. And I was like, and he would let them do it for a little bit, and then he'd be like, I don't make the decisions around here, she does. So it's really actually helpful if we have people around us who will do that kind of promotion and help redirect the conversation when that happens. I have a zillion stories that he did on that.
I have one quick thing to add. I love this event. I love this Women in Tech event. I love the panel every year. I have a dream that someday I go to an event and it's just called like tech. And like I walk in and I'm like, oh shit, it's all women up there. But it doesn't have anything to do with women. It's just like business people. And like it happens to be all women because my whole life I've been going to panels and I've never went to a men in tech panel. And I've never went to a men in business panel. They're all men and no one seems to say anything. So there's a bunch of smart people in this room. You can make it happen.
I've literally been at conferences where the moderator will say, "We have a treat. A young lady will speak now."
I think we all have those stories. But I also want to say something that as women, and hopefully I have had that dream for a long time. It still hasn't come true, but there's hope in our lifetime.
Me and
But
you.
I want to say that, I was late for something. I had multiple balls in the air. My husband was still alive and something had happened. And that matters to me. Your family does matter, but you don't have to make a choice. And I raced into the meeting and then I suddenly looked at everybody and went, I'm not going to apologize. We were, again, we were women. And I said, we're used to, women bring a whole different perspective to the job. We are people that are used to keeping a lot of balls in the air and juggling numerous problems at the same time. And we try to solve problems. We're problem solvers. And we need to embrace the fact that we are proud. That is a fact. Women, especially, women tend to try to solve problems. So I used to, people used to say you can't have it all. This is another true story. When I married my husband, which was a while ago now, but the CEO of General Motors at the time's wife said to me, you can be a good employee or a good wife, but you can't be both. And that, Jen will remember this more than you two. We hope that some of you never have to have some of the stories that we have, but embrace who you are, embrace your life experiences, and bring those to your job. So let me ask you another question. Have any of you had to navigate, you can feel there's some generational stuff up here, and I'm praying it's a reality that this is still a fact, but have any of you had to navigate the gender pay gap? Yes, as I get, some of it's but I'm hoping you two haven't. Have you? And how do you do it? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
We're not done yet.
We're not done yet.
But how do you navigate it? What's your recommendation to?
Demand that your company does a comp analysis. So the biggest thing that I found, so in people ops, that's one of the first things I always advise companies to do is bring somebody in, tell us how much all our people should make. All right, we have filters in our HR systems. Let's add some genders to those people. And now, which percentile does our population fall at? Where do our men fall in terms of the same role? Where are they falling versus our women? Same title, same years of experience, all of that. And I find that a lot of times they don't know what they don't know. And then when you bring it to the table, then they can't ignore it anymore. And so then they have to do something about it. And so you're forcing their hand a little bit, but that's okay. Like, it's okay to bring the data. I feel like that's a really big point that everyone's always saying. It's like, bring the data, data-driven, data this, data that, data. It's like, okay, well, here's the data. What you gonna do now? I brought it. All right, let's fix it, and make a plan. So that's from a very logistical people ops perspective. But I'd be curious to hear what both of you think.
I feel like it's really hard for me to answer that question because, I'm a one of a kind in my companies, right? Most companies don't have more than one CEO. So I'm going to take that question from a slightly different angle. When you start a company, the battle is often with investors who say things like, you should work for free forever. And it's like, I've had a number of times where I've had somebody come in and say, well, for startups, we can't possibly pay that much. And I'm like, I'm a veteran venture-backed CEO. I don't work for free. And I have had people say funding the company becomes contingent on you taking a dramatic pay cut. So my tip on that is, if that happens, time limit it at that point. That's the one trick. It's not a perfect trick, but it's time. That's what I have found works, which is essentially say, fine, I will take a 50% pay cut. This is a true story. 50% pay cut until I raise the next round. And then it automatically changes. The trick is, if you don't do that, it's really hard, because then everybody wants to put you on some kind of incrementalism. And it's like, no, I'm contributing this money to this runway. And I'll do that for a limited period of time, like 9 months. And then it's going to change, and it's not going to change a little bit, it's going to change a lot. So that's my only tip for, if you're in the place where you're negotiating your salary with people who are giving you money to run the company, which is usually the position I'm in. I can't, and I will ask for, salary surveys and that kind of thing, but it gets really weird when you're talking to investors about this topic. And it is quite tricky, because oftentimes, it's a question of, can you get the company funded at all? And so that's why I'm giving you kind of like, there's a way around that question a little bit from that perspective. But I do think there is a gap, and you have to not be afraid. But in the startup world, there are expectations about what stage the startup is at and how fast it's burning, and those kinds of things that are a little bit different and don't work. I mean, what you're talking about can work in an organization that's bigger than like 3 people. Yeah. In 3 people, there's no statistical significance about any of it.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think, looking at it also as now someone who can influence the pay of people who work at the company. One discussion I've had with my CEO is to say, we don't want people to feel they have to advocate for pay raises, because that's when that difference starts to really become visible, right? Because, we know the statistics, women don't ask as much as men do, women don't ask as often. So that's what we want to avoid, and I think that's kind of where I would come at it from.
Okay, so we're now 1 minute and 34 seconds over, and I had about 10 more questions. So let me ask you, just give final thoughts. What ways, big or small, would you tell managers how they can help women in tech?
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. So as a manager, from that perspective myself, I would say one thing that I've been very aware of is that because there are so few women in our roles as well, whether we want it or not, we're somehow examples, right, and role models. So I'm very aware of the tone that I'm setting for other women who work in the same space in the company. And I still remember from when I was in my 20s, I had a colleague come and talk to me about how she had this customer who was always like really inappropriate with her, to ridiculously so. And it happened consistently. It happened every time they met, and she'd put up with it. And I just asked her, like, why are you putting up with this? Why don't you just tell, like, your boss? Like, no one in this company expects you to deal with that kind of behavior. And she's like, well, my manager's a woman. She accepts it. She's seen him do it to me, and she doesn't make a fuss. And, for me, that was just like, wow, okay. Like, that's how these things get set, right? So as a manager, I see that role that we play is so much more weighty because there's so few of us in these roles. Then I guess as an employee, I would say, I think it's important to also ask for what you need, and sometimes managers don't know, how to help, and there's no harm in asking for those things. I've kind of struggled with endometriosis my whole life, and a lot of male managers don't know what that is even. In fact, a lot of women don't know what that is. It's a very rare condition, right? And
not as rare as you think it is.
Yes, that's true. It's not as rare as you think it is. It's just not talked about all that much. But very early on, I just decided I was going to tell people, and I would tell the people I was working for, I'm like, hey, I'm going to put in 100% effort all the time, but a couple of days a month, I'm going to have to work from home. And they were fine with it. My productivity never bothered them. My work spoke for itself, and people were happy to help. So I think sometimes there's no shame in asking for things that you need as well.
Yeah. I would say remember it doesn't have to be or, it can be and. And so I think we do this a lot where it's like this or that, or there's a common thing. Shine and Rise is a local group that was started here, and it's the idea like it doesn't have to be me or you on the board. There can be two women on the board. It can be it can be all of us. And so challenging yourself not to fall into that, because even I find myself falling into the trap of like, well, I was always one of the guys, or like I brushed that stuff off. And then when I have a moment to reflect, I'm like, yeah, but that's not the world I want to be. Like, I shouldn't have had to do that. And I've had some female managers who definitely had that mindset of buck up, like that is how it is, and I'm helping you by helping you deal with what's to come instead of helping you change it, and being that force. So I would just try to pause. Sometimes I think we all fall into that. I think that's it.
I'm just trying to think about, what's the generalizable. I think I'm just going to tell a story. I had an investor who insisted on kissing me. And the first time it happened, I was like totally shocked. And then it happened again. And I'm like, God, what in the world is happening? This is just bizarre. And it wasn't like, I'm going to like do the French, air kiss thing, and it was like, this is really weird. And so I went and talked to two of my men friends, because everybody who's working closely with me were men. And I said, I don't know what to do. And the first reaction was, you should get one of your board members to talk to them. I thought that would be a possibility. And then we talked more about it, and we decided that actually I just needed to, I needed support. Even though I'd been a CEO for a long time, and this was clearly, in my view, outside the pale, and this was somebody I was going to have to interact with on an ongoing basis. But I got some encouragement from people around me to say, okay. And I gave him a call, and I said, look, this behavior makes me uncomfortable. And he apologized. He said he didn't realize that. I mean, I don't know if anybody had ever told him. I don't know how he thought this was okay. He wasn't a young guy.
Might be European.
He wasn't a European either. He was Midwestern. And so you just sit there and you go, oh my gosh. And then I had to normalize that relationship. He's on my board. Let me be a little more specific than investor, okay? And I was like, okay, but we've got to stop this. And I also, for at least a little while, made sure that I wasn't alone with him. I just told some of the colleagues that were close to me, and I'm like, just don't leave me alone. But they helped give me the support to actually do that. And I kind of share that story, and I take away a couple things. You might need to be the person who makes somebody feel safe enough to tell you when something inappropriate is happening. And then you got to figure out, how do you help that person navigate it? And I think it was really good that my colleagues in that moment, they suggested somebody else could confront the thing, but we all landed on the idea that it was actually better if I did it. But I needed to work through that with somebody's, and then I needed to have support in that, and I'm a strong woman and have had way too many bad encounters, but this is in the last 5 years, so this is not that far, 5-7 years, whatever. And so it's like, how do you do that? And how do we create spaces where it's okay to talk about it, and it's okay for people to provide support and help people process through it? Because I think when it happens, at least when it happens to me, it's so surprising that I don't quite know what to do. And then I feel like, well, do I just ignore it? And there's a part of me that just wants to ignore it. But I don't ever want it to happen again. So, it clearly was not like a one-off, right? It happened more than once. So then I was like, okay, now this is a pattern, we gotta fix it. So I think we have to create communities or relationships where that kind of thing can get talked about and supported, and then we can guide each other through it.
Those are wise words. You're bringing back a lot of memories, which we'll talk about another day. Let's hear it for the three panelists and the job that they did tonight. Let's give an applause for everybody here who wants to support women and women in tech. And let's have a good evening. Thank you very much.